Hi, good morning, everyone. Right. Okay. So, okay. All right. See, we created half portion of this use case. Let me first of all open that workflow. So I'll go to setup, build and create, and then workflows and approval. So we were doing this assignment, that new position assignment notification. And so like we configured this immediate action, right? We configured the immediate action. So what we did is, like, for the workflow action, as soon as the position would be created with all those conditions, like the status should not equals to on hold, the status again should not equals to recruited, or maybe the status should not equals to the closed. So if all those three conditions would match, it would come to the action part. And as in part of immediate action, we are going to fire an email alert, as soon as the position would be getting created. Now, the second part of this use case was to design time dependent actions. And we are being told to send an email again 10 days before the closing date of position, 5 days before the milestone, the closing date, similarly for 2 days for one, and even on the day of the milestone date, we have to send the email alerts accordingly. And what should happen after 1 day of the milestone date? We should update the field, particularly status field, as closed. So this was the whole time dependent action, the whole scheduled action that we have to create. Now see, let's understand one thing. Before you go to create, a time dependent action, if you go with the immediate, you can see that you could directly add action over here. I could directly add any action: email alert, field update, outbound, assigning a new task. I could add anything and directly. And to know this governor limit, that how many of the immediate actions you could add in a single workflow rule, the answer is 40. We could add 40 immediate actions. Let's now talk about the time dependent actions. See, whenever I wanted to add a time dependent action, the first thing is to create a time trigger. The time dependent actions, they are always added inside time trigger. Listen this very carefully. Listen this very carefully. Whenever you want it, see, there's no such button called add workflow action over here. Why it is not popping up, we are going to see that, so don't worry. The first thing to understand, the time dependent actions are always added inside a time trigger. So if you wanted to have any time dependent action, the first thing is you have to create time triggers. Now, what exactly is a time trigger? This is what you see, like 10 days before, 5 days before, 0 days after, 1 day after. These are what? These are typically called as time triggers. These are typically called as time triggers, right? These are typically called as time triggers. So I first of all have to create a time trigger, right? So how to create that? You see, there's a button for this, add time triggers. I clicked onto this and I'm creating a time trigger. The first time trigger is 10 days before. Before what? Milestone date, closing date of this position. So I accordingly would select like 10 what? Days. After or before? Days or hours, right? You're having this hour, this days, hours. So I'm selecting days. Before and after? 10 days before. 10 days before. Before what? Now, when I come to this part, it would give you one common app option for every rule, that is rule trigger date. If you are creating this rule, if you are creating this rule with today's date, 12th of December, so 10 days before this, after this, from the rule trigger, that you will going to find it everywhere. This option is common for everyone. Apart from this, all of the options, whatever you see, these are date fields inside position object. All of those fields whose data type is date and time, date and time, whatever, date or date and time, they are always listed out. But this option is always common. Rule trigger date. I mean, if you are triggering this rule, if you are creating this rule by today, so it would going to count it like 10 days before. Obviously, it cannot do anything before to that. If you are selecting this, if you are selecting this option, very obviously it should be after. I mean, if I'm selecting 10 rule trigger date, I cannot go in past and do something. We are not, workflow is not capable to go, I mean, in the past, there is no time machine for that, right? So if this option you are selecting, common sense is like you have to select after from this. If today is my rule trigger date, I cannot go 10 days before to that. No, it's not possible, right? So, but in our case, it is not the case. I mean, we have to select 10 days before what? Before milestone date. So all of those fields of position object where the data type is date or date and time, they are being listed out over here. Like created date, last modified date, milestone date, open date. What according to our logic suits 10 days before position milestone date. And I will save this. Now see what is created now. What is created now? This is called as time trigger. And inside a time trigger, you see this button. So whenever you have to create an action, time dependent action, first thing you have to create a time trigger. First thing you have to create a time trigger. See, you have to create a time trigger. All right. Now, let me take you to one of the governor limit, like how many time triggers I could create in a single workflow rule. We just have created one. Now, a workflow could have maximum 10 time triggers. A workflow could have maximum 10 time triggers, not more than that. This one, what you have created, this one, what you have created now, this is called as time trigger. I created one, maximum I could create 10. That means I'm left with 9 more. All right. So we can create maximum 10 time triggers. Inside time trigger, we have to add the action. We'll see this later. First of all, let me create all those required time triggers. So in our use case, it is 10 days before. The second is 5 days before, 2 days before, 1 day before, 0 days after, and 1 day after. Let me first of all, create all of those time triggers. This is my first time trigger. I would add second time trigger, which is like 5 days before what? Position milestone date. Now I added 2 time triggers. I could add 8 more than 2 days before milestone date. This one is my third time trigger. I could add 7 more because the governor limit is 1 day before milestone date. Governor limit is you can add maximum 10 time triggers, not more than that. 10 days, 5 days, 2 days, 1 day before. Now 0 days after or before, it doesn't make any differences. But if you select it before, it would automatically come to after. Let me show you that. So if I select 0 days before and I put it over here, when I save this, it would be saying that 0 days after. So for 0, it would always take after. So it's up to you whether you select after or now this is like 10 days, 5 days, 2 days, 10, 5, 2, 1, 0, 1, Yes, one is also there. 0. And then one day after, I mean, after the milestone date has been crossed. So it would be like one day after what? After the milestone date. Let me save it. Now see, I have created all these requires time trigger. How many of them? How many of them? This is my first, and then second, and then third, fourth, and fifth, and sixth as well. Yes. So out of 10 time triggers, I have created 6. Out of 10 time triggers, I have created 6. We can create 4 more, but we don't require for in this example. We don't require that. Maximum we required 6, so we already have created. All right. Now let's come to them one by one. So 10 days before position milestone date. Now let's come to the action part. What you wanted to do. I wanted to send an email. For this, I was asking you to create separate email templates for every time trigger. That means for immediate, you should use something else. For 10 days before, you should use something else. For 5 days before, you should you should use a separate email template for this. This I was asking to do. I hope everyone at least have created that email templates accordingly. If not, you please create it for today before solving this example. Right? So email template, and I mean, please put me into that CC so that I would understand those who have completed this. If you wanted, otherwise, no problem. Right? So 10 days before position milestone date, what you want? I wanted to assign a new task? No. Should I wanted to update any field? No. Did I wanted to send an outbound message? No. What we want? We wanted to send an email alert. So I'm selecting email alert. All right. So it would be like 10 days before position milestone date. I am selecting same email template every time. You have to create 5 to 6, whatever, separate. I'm creating the same, the new position notification template. From the list of all these users, I'm selecting email, this email ID, and let me save this. All right. So I just have added, I just have added one action, number 1. Into this time trigger, into this particular time trigger, my time trigger is this one. Now into this time trigger, I have added one action. All right, I have added one action. This is my first action. I can see this button is still visible to me. If this button is still visible, I could add more actions. All right, so let's come to see how many actions we could add inside one time trigger. Inside one time trigger, how many actions we could add. So based on that, we are going to discuss about one of the governor limits that you have to remember, and that could be asked in interviews as well. See, you could add maximum 10 time triggers. You could create maximum 10 time triggers. How many of them we have created? 6, right? 1, 10 days, 2, 5 days, third, second, 2 days, and then fourth, and then fifth, and then sixth. All right. So I could create in a single workflow rule, we could create maximum 10 time triggers. Now inside single time trigger, like this one, how many actions could be added? So inside a single time, inside a single time trigger, you could add 40 actions, just like your immediate. How many, if you go to the immediate workflow actions, how many actions you could add it over here? 40. So if somebody would ask you, how many immediate actions and how many time dependent actions a workflow could achieve? So for immediate, the answer is 40. A workflow rule can have 40 immediate actions. You could add 40 actions over here inside this block. Now let's talk about time dependent. So here a little calculation is there. I could create maximum 10 time triggers. Inside single time trigger, again, I could add 40 action. So what would be the final capacity of time dependent actions? It would be like you in a single you could add 40. There maximum there could be 10 time triggers. So it becomes like 40 multiplied by 10, and that becomes 400 time dependent actions. Now, finally, let's come to this conclusion part. If somebody would ask you this in interview, a workflow can have how many immediate and time dependent actions? So you could answer that workflow can have 40 immediate actions, whereas it could have 400 time dependent actions. And how come 400? We can create maximum 10 time triggers. In a single time trigger, I could add 40 actions. So 40 multiplied by 10 is 400. 400 time triggers. All right, that is what it is. All right, so we don't have it inside every time trigger. We just require to add one action. For every time trigger, we just require to fire one. So I would be doing the same thing. So 10 days is completed. Let's me come to the 5 days. 5 days before also, I wanted to send an email, right? So it would be like 5 days before position milestone date. Let me select that email template. You must have separate email templates for everything. I'm using the same one. I would be using same one. All right, so 5 days before also. And then 2 days. So 2 days again, I wanted to add email alert only. And after that, it would be 1 day. So 1 day before, I also would require to send an email. So that would be 1 day. Same email template every time I'm using. From here, the list, I would select email. I'm not giving any CCs. You could add me onto that. When you design this rule, please add me. And 0 days after, I mean, on the date of position milestone date, again, I have to fire that email. So it would be like 0 days before or after, it's one and same thing. But if you select before, it would automatically convert it to after. So better is to select after itself. All right. So see, this was all email alerts. Now, what should happen when the position milestone date has been crossed? Let's say it was 20th of December and now it becomes 21st, right? So what should happen on 21st of December? So what should happen on 21st of December? On 21st of December, 1 day after milestone date, the status field should automatically be updated to closed. That's a pick list value. It has having so many values, so it should automatically be get updated to closed. So let's go to that time trigger. 1 day after the position milestone date, I should perform a field update action. See, I'm not going with email alert. I'm going with field update action. So 1 day after the position milestone date, I have to update the position status value. All right. I have to update the position status value. So you have to update the position, which value? Status. So position status fields to, oh, position status, this one, sorry. Yeah. So what should be, I mean, if for example, I'll just tell you one thing. Let me duplicate this tab. For example, if for example, there's a position has been generated called field representative. Now for this position, let's say the value is in progress. I mean, at the time of creation, the value is in progress. Let's consider. So if you are updating a field, so what should be the value? the value above the current one. If you go with this option, so what should happen? The value above the current one, it is what? Open approved. Do you wanted this? No. The value below the current one, for example, it is in progress. So what you wanted? On hold, the value, one value below this. No, this is even not. I wanted to have a specific value. What is that? It should become closed. So I'm going with the third option, a specific value. And what is that? Closed. All right. And then save it. And save it. So you set up everything, right? You set up all of them. You set up all of them, right? Once everything has been done, when everything has been in place, done, and then activate this. I told you that by default, workflows and process builder, they even your flow, no automation in Salesforce apart from trigger is activated automatically. No, if you create a workflow, you create a process builder, you create a lightning flow, all of them you have to activate. If you create a workflow, that would not be activated once you save it. Same with the flows and process builder. Trigger is the only part. Once you save the code, it would become activate in backend automatically. Right. So that is the only thing. So I have to activate to make this rule happen. I have to activate this. I'm going with this button, activate. Now, why come this page is coming? Because you are planning to send some emails in future. So it would ask you to select the user. And this would work if you are having multiple users. For us, it would only show one user, and that is the system admin. So there's nothing worried. I mean, you just don't have to make any changes onto this page. Just go with default workflow user. Go to this lookup, select this user, and save it, nothing else, no problem. All right, now your rule is being activated. And tell me when it is going to be get fired. It would be fired as soon as you create one new record inside position. So what I would be doing, I'll go to position object and I would create a new position. So my position would be time-based workflow rule test. Number of vacancies are 10. HR email ID is, I'm giving my email ID as sfdckasim@gmail.com. HR manager, I would be selecting as Akshay Dave. Position status is new. If it is on hold, my automation would not fire. If it is recruited, again. If it is closed, no. So out of these three, you can select. I mean, among these three values, I'm selecting new position. Contact number is this. Location is Bangalore, Chennai, whatever. Minimum budget, maximum budget. Today is open date. Now close date, I would be selecting as 30th of December. All right, this is the closing date. Let me copy and paste everything. Passport also required. Travel also required. Now, when I would save things, when I would save this in the backend, my workflow would fire. All right. So let me open that Gmail ID. All right. So now let's save this. The HR manager is okay. We are having that one-to-one association in place. So let me do one thing. Let me select who is vacant. Sunil Sharma is not having any position associated to him. So I'll give this to Sunil Sharma, and let me save this. Right. So this rule, I mean, we just have saved a record, created. So we are expecting one email immediately. Alert, a new position with this name has been created. And these are all the details, right? These all are the details. So this is your immediate action. How would you know about the time-dependent actions that you have created? And I have told you one thing yesterday, that there are 3 different types of evaluation criteria: created, and every time it is edited, created, and any time it is edited. But when you go for, number two, like, I mean, If you go with created and every time it is edited, you cannot go with time dependent actions. Let me select any one of them just to show you. If you go with created and every time it is edited, you cannot create a time dependent action. So why? Let's talk about this. Why I cannot create a time dependent actions on created and every time it is edited? And the second thing, what about all of those time based actions, where they are being stored? Now listen this very carefully, and nobody would teach you this. You probably would not find this even if you go with certain videos, whatever is there, a short videos of trainings. People are making such videos like learn Salesforce in 24 hours, in 8 hours. So obviously the content would be just one sentence. What is a workflow? Workflow is a business automation tool. That's it. You learned workflow. Agya. What is a flow? Flow is an advanced business automation tool. That's it. Now you have learned flow. So this is the way, I mean, people are posting their videos onto YouTube. Just time waste, nothing else. Anyways, so whenever you create a time dependent action, listen this and write it down. Whenever you create a time dependent action, all of the time dependent action goes to a particular place called as workflow queue. A particular place called as workflow queue. Time-based workflow queues or simple workflow queues. Whenever you create any time-dependent action, that goes to a particular place called as workflow queue, time-based workflow queue. Now, if I click this, and without giving any filter condition, then just press the search button. You see, these are the time-dependent actions. These all are the time-dependent actions. These all are the time-dependent actions. Where they are present inside a place. There's a particular memory. There is a particular place for this called as workflow queues, time-based workflow queues. Now, this would show me who created this, what was the name of user, what is the name of rule, on which object, when it was created, and more importantly, the most important part, when it has been scheduled to run. Your 10 days before would going to be run, I think, on 20th. Then 5 days, 2 days, 1 day, and the day, 0 day, 30th was the milestone date, right? And 1 day after. See, all of your time dependent action, they are put in a place called as workflow queue. Right? So one more thing to know, I mean, before I conclude this discussion, one important thing. See, if I go to this workflow, right, this was having some time dependent actions into this, where it is, sorry, what I'm showing you. If I go to this workflow, now this is that workflow. It was having all of those time dependent actions, right? I go to edit. All right, no, there's no need to go to the edit. I just deactivate this. So if I deactivate this, what would happen to all those time dependent actions? Are they going to fire or not? This is one of the interview question. You created a workflow rule with some of the time. Listen this, guys, very, very carefully. Listen this. This is what we are discussing, are being asked in your interviews. I created a workflow rule. I have added few of the time dependent actions. I make it active, and then that rule was fired. Like, you created this on position, you make it active, and when the position record was being created, so the rule was fired. So if the rule was fired, that means all of those time dependent action, they are now present inside time based workflows. All right, they have been scheduled and they are present inside time based workflow queue, queue. Right, now what would happen if I deactivate this rule? What would happen? If I don't wanted this rule to be get fired, so I deactivate this. You deactivate this rule. If you go back to the time-based workflow, see, if I even refresh that, the initial assumption would be like, okay, if you deactivate the rule, why you deactivated? Because you don't wanted this rule to be get fired, right? You deactivate this. So ideally, this memory should be get flushed out, but it's not. No. Even if you deactivate the rule, once these entries has been created inside your time-based workflow, they would still present and they are going to be fired on their scheduled date. Even though what you feel is I have deactivated my rule, so they should not fired. No, this is not going to be happen. So if you wanted this rule should not get fired, first thing, deactivate this rule, go to your workflow, or go to your workflow queue, and from there delete all these entries as well. And then only it would not going to be get fired. All right, this was first thing. Let me deactivate this. Let me deactivate this, and let's go to the position object once again, because that is being on created. I always have to create a new record. Can I clone this? Let me see. I could clone this. I could give the name as 1, but I would have to select a separate hiring manager. I've seen the record of Rahat. She's also not having any position. All right, so now this rule is again activated. So one more email, see, one email alert has been delivered immediately. Now if I go to this the workflow queue, here I could see the entries are once again. Now this was first thing. Second thing, if I deactivate this rule now, all right, and even if I deleted this, so what would happen? So if you try to deactivate, that would fine. If you try to delete, it would not allow you. Why? This workflow rule is currently having some pending actions inside where? Inside workflow queue. And if you really wanted to delete this, first of all, you should go and remove all those actions from here. All right. So these are the two important questions. What happens when you deactivate? What happens when you delete? If a workflow is having certain time dependent actions, what would happen if you deactivate this? Are those actions would be fired or not? The answer is they would be fired. On their scheduled time, they would going to be get fired as it is. And it has no concern whether the rule is still activated or it's being deactivated. They are going to be get fired. Now coming to the second question, what would happen if you try to delete? If you delete that, the first thing, we cannot delete it unless the workflow is having certain pending actions inside workflow queue. You cannot delete. Salesforce would not allow you to delete that. All right. So these are the two important things that you should be know. Now, last part, the conclusion. Why cannot I create time dependent actions for created and every time it is edited? So the reason behind is, see, when you create, for example, I created a rule over here. Now we know one thing. When this rule would getting fired, it's for example, it is displaying me number of positions for this is something like this. And let's consider that Salesforce would allow us, okay, if you even edit this, that time also the rule would getting fired. Let me show you. Let me reactivate this rule. And I have edited this a little bit, and let me now save it. So I have activated this. I edited this. Did I get any one more email over here? Let me refresh and show you. Answer would be no. You are not going to get any email because this is on created, and every time it is on created, you are editing. Did it makes any redundant entries over here? Again, no. So see, the reason behind this is why Salesforce does not allow you to create time dependent actions on created and every time it is edited. So for this, you have to think reversely. You have to apply reverse engineering over here. Let's consider, let's assume that Salesforce would allow us to select the time dependent action for created and every time it is edited. Let's assume for a time being, let's assume. So in that case, what is going to be happen? I just have edited this record. If I edited this record, again, the rule would getting fired. If Salesforce allows us, we'll have to assume this. If you don't assume this, you will not going to understand. So you obviously would have to make this wrong assumption. All right. So we have to make certain hypotheses. Without those assumptions, we cannot understand. All right. So let's consider that. Let's take this as an hypothesis that Salesforce would allow us, and Salesforce allow us to create time dependent actions for created and every time it is edited. When I created this record, the rule was fired. The rule fired, it gives me the according responses, the immediate and time dependent, everything. And second, when I edit this record, again, the rule was fired. So I edited a little bit this record. Again, the rule was fired. So I would get one second email. Let's say the first email, it was mentioning the location is Chennai, position is 10, something like that. In my second for the same reference, P0013, I'll get one more email. It would mention that, let's say this is 0013 only. It would mention that the location is something else, number of position. So in one email, it was mentioning for 0013, it is for Bangalore. Now it is showing it is for Chennai. It has some third email would occur. It would say it's for Lucknow. Matlab, you are getting this all. How would you understand which one is an authenticated data? That means it would obviously going to create a redundancy, a confusion, and ambiguity. And similarly, that was the first thing. Okay, if Salesforce allow you to do this, it would create the redundancies, it would create confusions, it would create what we can say, will not understand which one is exactly is the original one, or maybe which email which have to follow, which data we have to refer. And the most important thing would be like, it would create duplicate entries inside your workflow queue. So what is going to be happen would be like, जैसे कि 20 तारीख को 20th of December एक ईमेल आएगा, और वो ईमेल कुछ अलग बातें बताएगा. वो कहेगा कि एक पोजीशन है जिसका रेफरेंस है 0013, ये पोजीशन जनरेट हुई है चेन्नई लोकेशन के लिए, और ये पोजीशन में आपको इतने इतने कैंडिडेट रिक्रूट करना है. ठीक है, अब ये एक एंट्री हो गई, एक एंट्री में भी यहाँ पर है, और जो कि नहीं है, मतलब वो नहीं होना चाहिए इसलिए नहीं है, लेकिन लेट्स कंसीडर कि एक एंट्री यहाँ पर है. थोड़ी देर बाद में एक और ईमेल आता है, एंड इट वुड से कि जो P0013 है वो पोजीशन जनरेट हुई है बेंगलोर के लिए, और उसमें आपको ये करना है. थोड़ी देर बाद एक और ईमेल आता है जो कहता है कि P1003 जो है वो नागपुर लोकेशन के लिए है, और उसके लिए आपको इतने इतने कैंडिडेट. तो इट व्हाट दिस इज हैपनिंग, टेल मी. दिस इज द रिडंडेंसीज ऑफ रिकॉर्ड. This is the redundancies of record, and that is the reason Salesforce has not allowed you to create time dependent actions on created and every time it is edited. When you edit this, you cannot go for the time dependent. If you certainly wanted to have those functionality, you'll have to impose certain conditions, but the criteria should not be created and every time it is edited, rather created and any time it is edited, meeting certain conditions. So you will have to impose certain conditions to avoid this redundancies. What could I add in that case? I could add that, for example, there's a formula called is change. Is change. For example, if this value, if the position status has been changed, or maybe like, number of vacancies has been changed, is changed. If this has been changed, I will not fire the rule. So I could definitely control that occurrences with the third one, created and every time it is edited, meeting the subsequent criteria. I could design a criteria in such a way that I could control the redundant occurrences. So that for that third one, it is allowed. But for the blind one, the second one is totally blind. Created and every time it is edited. If it is created, fire the rule. If it is edited, fire the rule. And don't see for anything. That's completely blind. So for that, time-dependent actions are not allowed. All right. This nobody would taught you. Nobody can teach you this, because this is something most of the people don't know this. If and why I'm telling you this, guys, because I take so many interviews. I ask these questions. You know what I get? This is something has been defined by Salesforce. That's a rule of Salesforce. You have to follow that. All right. Yeah, I mean, that's true. It's a rule of Salesforce. But whenever there is a rule, there might be, there is certain phenomenon for this. There is certain reason for this, right? So the most common answer every time whenever I ask this, why time dependent actions cannot be created and every time it is edited. The most common answer what I get is this is something defined by the Salesforce. You have to follow. All right. All right, then you said me to follow. I'll follow this. Thank you so much. So the answer to this is you'll have to start it like all of the time dependent action. They are always stored inside a memory, inside a place called as workflow queue. All right. And if Salesforce would allow you to create time dependence for creator and every time it is edited, this would create redundant entries. This would create ambiguity. This would create duplicate. This would create confused data. So that is the reason. That is the reason Salesforce has not allowed you to go for time dependent actions. And two more things we have covered. If you deactivate a rule which has been fired in past, which has been fired, which has entries inside workflow queue, what would happen to those entries? They would still be fired. And it is, I mean, even though if your workflow rule has been deactivated, these are going to be get fired on their scheduled time, on their scheduled date. So if you don't wanted them, there's no another way. You have to go and manually delete them. There's no another way. If you don't wanted those things to be get fired, you will have to manually go to workflow queue and there you have to delete those entries. First thing. Second, what would happen if I delete that workflow? The first thing, you cannot delete it. If it is having certain pending actions, you cannot delete. If you wanted to delete, you first of all would require to delete all those entries. You have to remove all those entries from here in the workflow queue and then go back and then delete that workflow. That would work. So these are the three important things that we have discussed. All right, that's all for today. Tomorrow we are going to start with the third and again an important thing called as task. Assigning a new task. Before that, cross object field update. Yes. Yes. Let me give it this command to unmute. Yes. All right. You can ask me. Any questions? Any questions?
Good morning, sir.
Yes. Good morning.
Yesterday, I put a message on the group about the assignment.
What was it? I haven't
There
seen.
were 3 assignments actually. The first I have done, and then third I have done already. Then second was configured.
From which?
Here
Which
it
part?
is. Last lecture.
Which part? This one. These assignments.
Yes, sir. Second one.
So tell me, what is your question?
The first case, there are two cases, no? To notify the contact person upon creating a new case record. Okay.
Configure a workflow rule on case object to notify the contact person upon creating a new case. Contact person upon creating a new case report upon existing and upon
I'm
editing the
not
existing
getting
report.
after and.
Notify the contact. ठीक है ना? Whenever you go to the case object, see, if you create a new case record, over here it's not mandatory, but with the additions like enterprise edition and everything, if you wanted to create a case must either be associated with contact or with account. If you don't select either of one, so it would not save this record. There's a validation working behind. So anyways, so what is your example? If your example is configure the workflow rule on the case object to notify the contact person whenever a new case record. So if for example, I selected a contact called Ashley, right? So if this case record has been created, all right, if I for example, if I save this, So one email should be get delivered. One email should be get delivered to Ashley. Now you will not find the email ID field over here. Oh, it's already, yeah, it's there. Good. So in that case, it's pretty simple thing if it's over here. So what you just have to do is like you just have to fire an email to Ashley and mention her that a new case has been created and is being like for your contact we have created a new case. I mean, maybe Ashley has contacted a person in sales, in service, sorry. So and she has raised a case, so we just have to put up an acknowledgement, dear Ashley, we have registered a case, I mean, for the problem you were facing, right? So this was not a big issue. And
After
this
answer.
after, and it would be like person and upon editing existing record. So if I create this, then also it would get fired. If I edit, for example, I go back to this and I change a little bit of this, and when I save this, that time also this would be fired. So you just have to select your rule as created, and every time it is edited, that's it.
Okay, sir. Thank
Hmm.
you.
Yeah. Yes, next. Any questions? All right, then. Thank you so much for joining.